All right, welcome to the world building panel for, well, the second world building panel for BrigadeCon 2014. The first BrigadeCon online free convention. It's pretty awesome so far. Everything has been really cool to watch. A lot of events, a lot of panels, a lot of games, prizes, all that. So it's been a blast to watch everyone, and now we're going to get going here. I'm Kirk, and I run this YouTube channel, PhDnD, and I will let my friend here, who needs no introductions, introduce himself. And then actually, if you want to talk about Child's Play, because you know a lot about them, so if you want to
Can do.
let them know what it's about.
Absolutely. I'm Matt. I run the YouTube channel A Fistful of Dice. And I'm super psyched to be talking about world building with Kirk. It's something that I think we both see eye to eye on a lot of aspects of it, so it's going to be a lot of fun talking about it. As far as Child's Play goes, BrigadeCon, we're having a lot of fun. We're having a lot of events. We're playing a lot of games, but we're also trying to raise some money for a good cause. We've already raised over $200 just selling T-shirts, and then today we've raised almost $300. So we're looking at right now over $500 raised in total for Child's Play so far, which is amazing. Child's Play is a charity that provides children in hospitals worldwide with toys, video games, books, movies, peripherals like iPads and Kindles and stuff like that, so they can relax and be kids still while they're dealing with adult issues and being sick and recovering from procedures and illnesses in hospitals. So it's a really great cause, really awesome charity, and we're very excited to be raising money for them. So if you're interested in donating, if you're watching this on the BrigadeCon website, there should be a widget down below, and if not, please go to brigadecon.org and click on Child's Play to donate. Even a few dollars will be awesome. So
Yes, it's an awesome charity. It's something close to what we love to do, so it's really cool that we can help bring that to people, like you said, who need it the most. So
absolutely,
yes, donate. I'm going to go make another donation here after the panel, so I encourage everyone who can to do the game. So yeah, we're going to go through. We've got some topics kind of lined up here, kind of the order that we've established that keeps you on track in world building anyways, because it's about the easiest thing to get off track on. Yeah. And so we tried to line up a couple of things we could talk about, a couple areas. So we'll try to pull questions from the Facebook page for the event, because I know there were a lot of questions there. And then if you have any questions, I think the Q&A app is up and ready. So
cool.
The first thing we wanted to talk about, and I will let Matt start it if you'd like, is inspiration and brainstorming, the very first steps.
Absolutely. I always say that when world building, you want to try to look for inspiration anywhere you can. And it's not like you sit there and you say, okay, time to get inspired. Like, it is a constant thing. And anyone who's done any sort of creating or world building or writing of any kind will know that just in your day-to-day life, you will see things and hear things and experience things that will inspire you, whether you want them to or not. They're things that inform your perspective and your perception, and ultimately those come out through your world building. It could be something simple as a movie or a TV show that you're watching, and you see a certain character or a certain location or an event that sort of sparks something, or you'll be reading in a book and a certain line of dialogue or something will get that train moving. But of the brainstorming process, I've talked about this in my campaign crafting series, where I like to think of these things as pillars, and they're the aspects of your world that the rest of your world is going to sort of hang on and intertwine between. So the pillars, think of them as like if you were going to boil down your world, if you were trying to pitch your world to somebody, like let's say Wizards of the Coast or Paizo or somebody got in touch with you and they say, hey, we're looking to make a new campaign setting. In 30 seconds, give us some tidbits about your world. The pillars would probably be the things that you would focus on. So there are things like, well, it's a desert world, or, It's a world that is just sort of emerging from the ashes of a war that has lasted centuries. You know, they're the big picture things about your world, and these pillars might not be connected to each other, but ultimately they're the things that you're going to use as pillars, as structures to keep the rest of your world aloft. So it's up to you as a world builder to sort of weave your the rest of your world around these pillars. And they should be big ideas, you know, things that you really want to incorporate into your world. So I don't know what your process is on this, Kirk, but maybe you can supplement here with some other brainstorming stuff.
Yeah, I think you hit it pretty well. You want to make sure you write this all down. I know this. You guys mentioned this in the world building panel earlier, and it's to write this stuff down. You know, you grab inspiration from video games, you know, books, everything. Like you said, even quotes or something. Be sure to put it down somewhere, whether it's in a notebook or I use just my phone, like the notepad or whatever, and I've got tons of pages of just random stuff. If anyone else ever read it, they would have no idea what it was, because it's whatever thought kind of flies in. I put it down there. Even just like cool words. If I think of a really cool word, something that might work as like a town name or something, I just throw it in there.
I do the same thing.
Yeah, and that's the best way I found, because if I just sit down and try to think of names for places, I'm never really satisfied.
Yeah.
With them. I always go with those really cool words from brainstorming and then just pull them off of that.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
that's what I do. Another thing is that this, like the inspiration and brainstorming and all that, keep it going throughout the entire process. Don't stop. This is not like a phase that just stops when you're ready to build your world. You want to keep open to all this, because you can change things as you go to fit kind of what you want, because what you want might change throughout the process. And for those pillars you were talking about, I think that's a really cool idea to help people ask themselves what they want in their world. A lot of people actually surprisingly try to create a world and they never really ask themselves what they wanted in it. They just try to make a world they think someone else might think is cool. They never said, you know, what do I want out of this setting? So the pillars, that's a really awesome thing.
Yeah, you're not people tend to forget that they're not creating a generic campaign setting that everyone's going to play in. You are crafting a world for you and your players, so it should be things that would interest you and your players. You know, you mentioned being open to change and different ideas and stuff. I would go off of that and say be open to getting rid of stuff too, getting rid of a pillar. You know, if you get to a point in your world building and you realize that one of these big ideas is just not meshing with the rest of them, just shove it aside. You know, you can always come back to it later, and these ideas can always be recycled. But you know, Kirk, you've been posting on the PhDnD Facebook a lot about, you know, you're doing some overhaul on the world that you're working on. You know, and I think that's that's part of the process, is you know, trimming the fat, as it were.
Yeah, and that's probably the best thing about this setting that I'm working on now. It's the first one where I've really been willing to do that. Where I think, like, writers know this really well. Don't be afraid to kill your baby, I think, is how they phrase it.
Yeah.
But yeah, don't get so attached to your early ideas, because I've created settings before where later on you lose interest in them. And it's because you tried to stick with something the whole entire way, even though you may have wanted to change it. So yeah, don't be afraid to just turn it completely upside down if you have to, and do whatever you want, because it's, you know, you're doing it for you. It's not like you're getting paid for this. And even if you are, you know, if it's going to make a better product, tear it apart.
Yeah. Well, and you want it to be something that you're passionate about. You want it to be something that you can get into. You know, you want to craft a world that you'd like to hang out in for, you know, a year or two, because that's how long ideally you're going to be hanging out in this world. So
yes. So kind of after that, once you've gathered some ideas, the first big step that I take anyways, and it might differ for you, Matt, is the map. That's usually like the first thing after I've got a general idea of like the pillars that I want, and I've got enough material to work with from like brainstorming. I want to lay it all on a map, even if it's just like a first draft, which I learned. I put a lot of time into a recent map and then just completely remade it, which is fine. But you want to know kind of the area you're working with. Fantasy books even are one of the keys where they're always going to have a map in the front because it's
Yeah.
just nice to know what you're working with.
Yeah. Yeah, map making for me, I tend to, it depends on what I'm doing. If I'm just running a short campaign for a few sessions and I know I'm not going to really need a map, I won't go too into it, but um I'm always I'm always hesitant to do the map, and it's one of those things where um, I sort of hesitate to pull the trigger on it because I feel like when I do the map, that's where the things are. That's where I have to start making sense of all these ideas that I have in all these
Yeah.
locations. So for me, it really varies on what I'm trying to do. Sometimes I'll do the map first thing before I've even thought about any of this. I'll just, I'll do it a lot of quick shape of a continent, and I'll say, hey, that looks kind of cool. I might use that for something. And sometimes we'll be 4 or 5 sessions in, and I'll go, here's the map, guys. Sorry it took so long.
Yeah.
So for me, this step really varies. But usually it is sort of in that within the process of deciding what the civilizations and the locations are going to be. In that process, I start mapping everything out.
hmm And it does vary. Like my first setting that I made, I ever played, and D&D at all. And so it started with a city. I
Right.
built this just town that they could work around, and then it built out from there, which is one way to go about it. And that's actually turned into a really cool setting. So a tip that I give is if you've never done any world building, is to start that way. Start small, and
Yeah.
then you and your players, which we'll talk about, can kind of fill it out as you need to, as you kind of discover what you need. Because if you just
Yeah.
try to build the whole thing up front, even if you kind of know what you're doing, it's still a mess.
Yeah, it's a bottom up approach versus a top down approach, and the bottom up approach can be really rewarding because, like you said, the DM is sort of discovering it as the players are as well. So you might have some ideas of what you want in the world, but sort of whatever direction the players decide to go, whatever hooks sort of arise out of those initial sessions, the world will sort of be generated around them almost. So that's an interesting method as well, and one that I use quite a bit just because time is limited, so I don't always
Yeah,
have as much time or effort available as I want to just sit there and just craft a world.
yeah, and your process has to reflect that. If you don't
Mm-hmm.
have all the time in the world, there's plenty of other ways to do it. The I know you've read it, and it's Fly Flourishes Lazy DM
Oh yeah.
book. That's a perfect thing for people with no time. I mean, it's very simple, but it's a method to do things that create a fun world and create fun adventures without taking all that time. So you have to, that's
Absolutely.
one of the first steps to ask yourself too is how much time do I have to put into this?
Yeah.
Because you obviously are not going to create brand new cultures and deities and races and all this if you don't have any time of what you're working with there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
But
and
no, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say, you can do things to like take established settings and pick an area of that setting and then use that as a base, like a groundwork, and switch things around how you want. So you can take Icewind Dale from the Forgotten Realms and completely redo it and take that map and move stuff around, and I want to add a river here and another mountain here, and rename these towns and stuff. I mean, it can be as simple as doing that if you're lacking in time.
Yeah, and that's a great thing to borrow from everywhere
Yeah.
and use whatever you want. Because if you're not, one thing you got to realize is you're probably not going to publish this setting. I mean, if
Yeah.
that's a goal of yours, that's fine. But like, I could never publish the setting I'm working on. It's a straight up rip off of about
Yeah.
10 different things.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, almost word for word, I've just taken certain things and put them in there. So
Yeah.
don't be afraid to do that. Definitely.
Well, and don't think that your setting is going to be publishing worthy right away. I mean, these settings like Greyhawk and the Forgotten Realms and stuff, these are settings that have been around for decades, And I mean, like Greyhawk as an example, that was Gary Gygax's like campaign world. He played in that world for 10, 20 years before he did anything with it, you know? And so that, I mean, your setting has to grow, you know? The world building process doesn't stop when you start playing. It is constant, you know?
Yeah, it's just kind of starting right there.
Exactly,
Uh,
yeah.
we have a question that kind of pertains to maps, and we kind of answered one already, I guess. Do you build your world around your campaign, or do you build the campaign within the world? And I would say what I do, anyways, is if I'm going to build a new setting, it's usually for a campaign that I have in mind. I've talked to players, kind of see what they want out of a campaign, like for themes and the kind of, do they want a lot of magic or no magic? And then I kind of build it around that. So I've definitely taken the campaign and the players into consideration in my part of the world building. And then
Right.
obviously when we start, it becomes everybody's world building.
Yeah. No, and I think both of those strategies are totally viable. I mean, there's not one that's better than the other. You know, it's the bottom up or the top down, and both can involve your players and both can be collaborative, and both are just totally viable techniques. There really is nothing better than one or the other. So
Yeah. And the question that was pertaining to maps, somebody says they like to use map makers and ask if, would we have any suggestions for programs like that?
hmm
Now, for me, I don't use map makers because any that I've ever tried are too confusing for me, and I don't have the
hmm
patience, even though you can do really cool things with them. So I draw by hand. And I know I've backed a couple of Kickstarters coming up with some
yeah.
new software, so I'm looking forward to that. But for now, I mean, have you used any programs you'd recommend, or?
Yeah, back when I had a lot of time, I actually made all of my maps with Photoshop, um, and that allowed me complete freedom to do whatever I wanted and make it look exactly how I wanted. But it was incredibly time consuming. Um, it ate up dozens of hours to create a single map. So these days I'll either jot things down by hand, or I'll use a campaign like Hexographer, which I'll do a screen share here of a map I've made with Hexographer.
Yeah.
And this is a map for my current Dungeons and Dragons online campaign, the Provokers game. And this is a map that I made in about 30 minutes using Hexographer. And you'll see that I mean,
Oh, wow.
it's a really simple map, but it gives the players an idea of the area they're in, where the mountains are, where the swamps, where the forests are, and it's kind of hard to see in the screen, but there's a little white dotted line where the roads are. So it gives them an idea of where they are and within the context of the world. And Hexographer is totally free. There is a paid version of it. I'm not actually sure what the paid version adds to it, but I mean, I made that with the free version, so it's a really simple program to use. You just add hexes to it until you have a map put together. So,
Yeah, that's
but yeah,
cool.
like you mentioned, I'm looking forward to Otherworld Mapper. I think that looks like a really intuitive program, and I think that's supposed to be coming out in I think December or January here for the backers. So I'm pretty excited
Hmm.
about that.
Yeah, there's some neat stuff coming out for sure. But yeah, like I said, for now, I've drawn by hand, and I mean, you can do whatever you want that way, but
hmm
it is time consuming as well, and it doesn't always look good. It's not something, something you have to do a lot of before I think you're ever going to be satisfied
Yeah,
with what you
well,
do.
and I like the idea having a software. It's easier to change stuff around if you need to. If you have a map that
Yes.
you've drawn, um, usually you'll end up drawing another map if you're wanting to make changes to it. So,
Yeah, exactly. I know
but
that one.
there is something really satisfying about drawing a map by hand. I have to say, some of my favorite maps that I have are ones that I've sat there and for a couple hours with some color pencils and put together. So,
Yeah, and I like doing it, but like you said, you have to, if you want to make major changes, you've got to almost start over.
yeah,
And
exactly.
so I'm going to try to show this, and you're not going to be able to see it, but that's the whole point. This is the latest one that I've done is basically the revision of my map, but I have to draw the entire thing super, super light.
Right.
I've got mountains, the rivers, forests, canyons, all that, because I'm afraid to cut it because I want everything's how I want it. And so
Right.
that's, like you said, how software can be better. You don't have to
Yeah.
worry about that.
Absolutely.
So yeah, with map making, just some things to keep in mind. I mean, check out the turning a map into a world panel that Matt was a part of earlier. You guys talked a lot about how, you know, geographical considerations and how that can play in. You talked about rivers flowing the wrong way and all that. And
Yeah.
so, when you make a map, do you follow a lot of that? Do you do a lot of fantasy?
I try to make things as close to real world as possible for the most part. Having mountains follow tectonic plates, or how tectonic plates typically work. Rivers flowing down from the mountains out to the sea, collecting in lakes. Not, and we talked about this in the other panel, but making sure that if I have different terrain and different biomes, that they sort of make sense. So I try to make everything sort of make sense from a high level, so that when you do run into something weird or fantastical, it sort of sticks out more to you. So when you run into an
Yeah.
island that's floating in the air or a river flowing backwards, it's like, huh, that's weird.
hmm And it becomes, yeah, it's important and it's interesting at that point.
Exactly. Well, it piques the player's interests a lot more.
Yeah. So after you've got, and even before, I mean, Matt talked about how he sometimes waits till he's kind of fleshed out some civilizations to make a map. Then talk about adding kind of life to your world, adding playable races, adding monsters. I'm not sure. I missed the first part of the monster panel. I've got that backlog to watch, so I'm not
Yeah.
sure what you talked about there. But what are your first steps there? Just first, do you even pick them? Do you just use them all? What do you do?
It's really easy to just throw everything into your setting, but from my standpoint, like, less is more. Uh, there are multiple races and multiple monsters in Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder and all these games. Not so you can use everything, but so you can pick what works for your setting. And so if you have let's say that you're creating a setting that is mostly in this frozen tundra, and you're wanting to have it be kind of this almost like a Viking style campaign where you're having to survive off the harsh land and it's cold. I might not put I can't think of an example, but there might not be everything living in this tundra. You might focus on a handful of things that are commonplace here. Maybe there's no elves up here in the north. Maybe they don't like the cold, or if there are elves, maybe they're like snow elves or something. Specifically evolved to live here. So use things that are going to work for your setting. You don't always have to have dragons, though. All my settings have dragons, but you don't always
Yeah.
have to have dragons. Or maybe dragons are extinct. So if the players come up on one, it's like, oh shit, they're not really extinct. There's one right there.
Yeah.
You don't have to have giants and orcs and goblins in every setting, or at least every area of your world. So I would say, like, for if you're gonna have um, playable races, I usually try to add most, if not all of them. Sometimes I'll say, oh, there's no humans, or sometimes I'll say, no gnomes or halflings, or there's no dragonborn or tiefling or stuff like that in here. Sometimes I'll exclude stuff, but for the most part, I add most of the playable races. But the monsters is really where I start sort of discriminating a little bit. And if I have
hmm
big monstrous civilizations, large populations of these things, I'll usually try to whittle it down to a handful of things that the players are aware of, at least.
Yeah. No, that's good. Yeah, for playable races, I don't like to limit it, just because as a player, I don't always like it when it's limited,
Yeah,
especially if it's a campaign. If it's a one shot, that's a different story. But
right.
really don't limit the playable races. But yeah, when it comes to monsters, and what I do is, since there's so many, it almost works easier for me to say, okay, which ones do I not want?
Yeah,
Like, for sure, do I not want dragons? Okay, kick them
right.
out. And then when you get to the ones that you do, are there any you want to change? I'll go through and give them like a gimmick or something that makes them different. If you
Right.
don't want them to be typical goblins or something, just one small thing can change them. But yeah, I start with what I don't want with monsters because it does make it more interesting, I think, if you do discriminate there.
Yeah.
If your world has everything that every other world has for monsters, it's very hard to make it interesting. You have to do a lot of work elsewhere for
Yeah,
that,
and I
anyways.
I like to look at monsters like like the same way I look at the playable races. Like I say, well, the elves are mostly in this empire, over here. And down here, these plains are actually ruled by a tribe of nomadic orcs or something like that. Like I try to come up with a place and an identity for these monsters. I don't like to just say, well, there's monsters all over the place and they're all in the dungeons. I try to
Yeah,
put them somewhere that makes sense and gives them a little bit of like a almost like a home, and a place to be. And uh, I just think that gives them a little bit more personality. Like you were saying, giving them a gimmick. Giving these monsters an identity and not just sort of chucking them in wherever they fit. That's convenient, but having them
yeah,
have an established presence, I think, makes them a little bit scarier and more deadly. So
yeah. I think it makes them more interesting. Once you've figured out what you want, then you've got to ask, okay, how do they fit into my world?
exactly.
Then that goes to where do they fit in. And here you can go back to the pillars Matt talked about and kind of compare. Say, okay, these are my pillars. How is that going to affect this monster and how it fits into the world? And what do
Yeah,
I need to
exactly.
do to make it work and fit into this world? So yeah, and you can also consider at this point. I know we had a question about gods and how to create gods for your world and deities. So if you have any tips on that on how to add it, that could be a whole
Oh
college course.
man.
But
Yeah.
yeah, have you ever created any yourself?
I've created pantheons in a couple of my settings, and usually I'll create at least one god for each alignment. So at minimum, I'll have usually 9 gods. Um, but, the pantheons I create, I always find myself getting bored with creating the gods. So honestly, I'll usually pull a pantheon from something existing. I'll use Egyptian gods or Norse gods or Greek gods, or I'll use, the Forgotten Realm pantheon or the pantheon of Dragonlance. And all of these things, they kind of work in any setting because they do represent, um, you know, different aspects. And it sort of works to have a pantheon that is not super specific to your world because if you think about it, the gods are extraplanar. They're not necessarily just hanging out on your planet or your world.
Mhm.
They're in a higher dimension or a higher plane of being where they are overseeing possibly multiple worlds. You can have a pantheon that stretches, across your like 4 or 5 different campaign settings, So,
Yeah,
but sometimes, I'll pick a pantheon to give flavor. Like I'm working on a setting right now, kind of on the side called Estia, and it's sort of a Mediterranean sort of antiquity type setting with with like Egyptian elves and Spartan dwarves and stuff like that. And so I'm using the Greek and the Egyptian pantheons for that setting, just because it works within the context of that world. But yeah, I have to say I don't get super into making deities, man. It's just not my thing, really.
yeah. And Keith, fellow Crimson Tiger Keith,
Yeah.
just asked on any tips for making your world creation story or pantheon. And I'm just like you, Matt. I made 4 gods from scratch once, and
Mm-hmm.
I hated it. Like
Yeah.
when we played that campaign, we're still playing it. It's actually a setting that I made last year. I don't like them. Like I almost
Yeah.
play and went back to we use the gods from like 4th edition, which are like a mix of Forgotten Realms and a couple other sources, but
Right.
I just wasn't satisfied with them at all. And so I
Yeah.
take a pantheon from a game or from, Forgotten Realms, and then just like monsters, kind of figure in, okay, how am I going to tweak it a little bit to fit
Yeah.
my setting?
Well, and I'll also, if I have a player who's playing a paladin or a cleric or something like that, if they want to create a god that they're following, I'll absolutely let them do that. And, they have to come to me and tell me the god's name and their alignment and sort of what they stand for and the basics about them. And then that god just joins whatever pantheon I happen to be using, you know? So I'm pretty
Yeah.
open to deities and stuff like that. It's not something that I try to keep simple or anything like that. Like there's just, you know, there's already hundreds of them just, you know, in the established D&D canon. So I'm not too picky about it.
Yeah, unless you have some huge inspiration or clear-cut idea where you want to go with it, that's one of those things. It's just best to use what's out there for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so another question that popped up that's kind of next on our topics is how do you define kingdom and regional boundaries? So how do you take the life that you've decided to put in, the playable races, the monsters, the deities, and how do you create, you know, kingdoms or cultures, tribes? I know you did a campaign crafting video kind of on that. So what's your
Yeah.
approach to where do you start with creating those boundaries?
Well, I look at geographical landmarks. I look at rivers. I look at mountains. I look at forests and valleys. I look at you know, civilizations of the past. They didn't have satellite imagery. They couldn't draw boundaries, you know, based on these things. They would say, well, my kingdom extends to the Istos River, you know, or you know, on this side, and it extends to the west coast on the other side. And they would stake those claims on those boundaries. You know, they wouldn't say, well, it extends 2 miles, you know, to the north, 5 miles. Like they have landmarks that they use to dictate where their kingdoms are. So usually that's how I'll do it. Or I'll just, you know, I'll use common sense and I'll think, okay, the elves live in the forest. The elves' boundary, it stops at the tree line. They have no interest in the land outside of this forest. You know, if you think about the elves of Mirkwood in Lord of the Rings, they don't want to leave Mirkwood. They're good with Mirkwood. They have, you know, they have enough resources, enough food, enough military power within Mirkwood. They're happy. You know, eventually they do take off for the Lonely Mountain, but you get what I'm saying. Like they have no use for further land. You know, if you're putting the dwarves in the north, they're happy mining the mountains. They don't want to go south to the desert. You know, there's nothing there for them. So just think about think of your civilization as a character, and then think about what that character wants, and think about would extending these borders like benefit them, or are they happy where they are?
Yeah, and that's with adding those. Sometimes I'm thinking of that when I'm making the map. So I'm thinking, you know, I want gnomes in an area that's like a canyon-y desert. This is straight out of a video game. And so I made sure there was like a canyon area on the map, and then go from what you just said. Yeah, why would they be there? Why would they want that area? And why would they not want, you know, 200 miles to the north? Why don't they want the forest? Think about what makes sense, and then kind of fill them in there. And I usually go with kingdoms, like smaller kingdoms all over, because you know, you can do empires and huge civilizations, but I find it's more fun for characters to be able to visit very different cultures without having to go, you know, thousands and thousands of miles away. So I do more of kingdoms just because I don't like empires, like big empires. So, but that's just a personal choice. I mean, you kind of have to ask yourself what you want.
I agree with that, and I think it gives, like you were saying, it's more varied, it's more diverse to have little kingdoms like that. I also really like the idea of city-states, you know, which is basically a kingdom within a single city, you know, and so there's sort of this no man's land in between all of these city-states, and the city-states can be allied with each other, they can war with each other, you know, it really kind of opens it up to make it pretty diverse, and you don't have to worry about, well, this city is owned by this person, and they also own this city, you know, they're all sort of entities unto themselves.
Yeah, that's a neat thing. There was a small setting from 4th edition called the Nenter Vale, which they used a lot of stuff with, and that's what it was like. It was a former far reaches of an empire that collapsed, and now it was each city was its own very different culture and very different.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't have to go far at all. You could head 2 days up the road and be at a completely different place.
Yeah.
So that was kind of cool, I thought. So yeah, I like to think in smaller scopes in regard to that. I
Yeah.
don't want one civilization filling my whole map, I guess. I've done that again in a previous setting and did not like that as much. So,
Yeah, I've done that before too, where I'll give one of the cultures a big empire, and it just gets boring. It's like, well, I wonder what this 19th city that's owned by the dwarves is like. It's
yeah.
it's all gonna be kind of the same, you know.
Yeah. And so with that, you want to research government a little bit. You want to make sure you know like how a kingdom works, and you can change that just like the map making. You can change geography rules however you want, but it's good to know how they work for a start. And
Yeah,
think of with kingdoms, what I think of is the easiest way to flesh them out is so if you've got a king in one area, how does he rule the furthest reaches of his kingdom? Like the furthest city away, how is he still in charge of that? And that helps
right.
keep the government working, in my opinion. It's the easiest tip that I use
Yeah,
to keep it making sense.
right. Yeah. Well, and thinking about, there are lots of cool sort of governments in the ancient world and the classical world. The Spartans had two kings. Like, that's weird, but it's kind of cool too. So
Yeah,
now in my current setting, the dwarves have two kings. They have two kings that each oversee a different aspect of the kingdom, and they'll like war with each other at times. They'll have a civil war within the same kingdom with two kings who are both the rightful king of this place. So,
yeah,
like you were saying, look at historical governments and stuff and use those as inspiration because there's a lot of nutso stuff out there, man. There
yeah.
were some weird governments back in the day. So,
Yeah, there's plenty of weird stuff. Real life history is not as boring as people sometimes think it is.
oh, it's sometimes more
Um,
interesting, man.
yeah, and I'm going to throw this in real quick. For those that didn't see it, you talked about Spartan dwarves
Yeah.
in your last panel. That was about the coolest thing I'd heard all day. I just wanted you to know that.
Yeah, they're pretty fun, man.
Yeah, that was sweet.
Yeah.
Um, so again, when you're considering these kingdoms and the governments and how they rule, again, the gods are going to play into that, or
Hmm.
maybe they don't. Maybe this is a kingdom that doesn't reflect that. So you're always referring back to kind of these old, which could kind of be pillars depending on kind of the other. So always check back with what you've done already. And if it doesn't mesh, it's not a big deal. Maybe you want to make a change at that point. But
Yeah.
it's always good to compare with what you have already because everything affects everything throughout it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Um, so within interesting civilizations, you've got interesting locations. So we had questions and I'm going to try to find them, but how do you let's talk city maps
Yeah.
first. What do you do? Because we had a guy in the event on Facebook ask, he's looking at the Urchin background.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
guessing 5th edition, which I think you know a lot about, like city streets and stuff. So
Right.
how far do you go when you're creating a city? Because those can get real complicated
Oh
if you let
man.
them.
Yeah. I have a real issue with cities and coming up with a map for a city. I've done it before, and you make the map and you realize I know nothing about how cities are built. This is incredibly complex. Like I have no idea how these streets should be. So I'll usually fall into either this city is really confusing because it's built upon the ruins of an old city, which in turn was built upon the ruins of an ancient city, and the streets are going all over the place, and there's some portions of the city that are modern and some that are ancient, so there really is no rhyme or reason to it, so then I don't really have to worry about making a map.
Hmm.
But I've also made cities that are incredibly organized, where everything is in its own district. So you might have the market district and the noble district and the common district, and that way you don't necessarily have to have a map, but you can say, well, the market district is in the northeast of the city, so you can head there if you want to, and you don't necessarily have to describe everything that's in the city. You can just give a basic gist of where things are located. Or you can, what I'll usually do is I'll usually, within a city or within a town, I'll come up with a couple different locations that would be of interest to the players. So a weapon shop, a temple, where the king lives and stuff like that. And if they need to go anywhere else or if they have any other wants, I can come up with stuff on the fly, But Oh, that's a good example right there that you just put on the screen of having the different districts. See, that's good. I like that because you don't have all the roads and all the buildings and stuff. You just have all the different areas of the map. So that's nice.
Yeah, like you said, there's two levels a city if I make a map at all, because I don't always make a city map. If
Right.
it's a huge, when I made an empire and I made the capital, I was not. I tried to start that city on a map, not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so this is an example. Yeah, like you said, I'll make either just flat out districts, and so yeah, market district. I don't remember what the black district is. Commons, and then inside is like the holy military scholars ward, all that. That way you've got a general direction if they want to look for something. Or I'll go as far, and I don't have one to screen share, um, but I'll go as far as if it's a smaller town, I'll draw all the buildings just from top view, and I'll just do it real
Right.
quick. I don't consciously think about them. I'm just like, oh, this block would be cool, if it had a couple here, use different shapes, and
Yeah.
then just kind of place things as you need to. But that's for a lot smaller cities, what I
Yeah,
do.
no, for sure. And I that other mapper software that we mentioned earlier is I guess they're going to have a city builder as well. So
Oh,
I'm
wow.
really excited about that because I think that's going to come in really handy for someone like me who just doesn't want to deal with it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. They're complicated.
Yeah.
And the things that I think about four main things when I make a city, I guess. Five, I guess. Food and water would be one.
Yeah.
When you place a city on a bigger map, think about, why is it there? They need some type of food or water. Where are they getting the
Mm-hmm.
food? Which
Yeah.
helps world building. I mean, it's almost a world building exercise.
Exactly.
I think waste. This is more of if you're actually going to draw the city out, but there's got to be some way to get rid of waste.
Right.
And then I'll do government and defenses. So,
I think that's
yeah,
really smart.
who's in charge there, and then how do they defend it? And you can go further into it. You can go like population or whatever, but usually you've got a general idea of how big a
Yeah.
city is.
And I'll look at imports and exports, the economy of the city,
Yes.
how they make their money, if any money. If they're near the woods, maybe they have a logging industry. If they're near the mountains, they're probably mining. If
Yep.
they're on the coast, they're probably receiving goods from other continents and exporting and stuff like that. So thinking about
Yeah.
that is smart too. And then that's also part of world building is looking at the location where this city is and sort of deciding how they make their money basically. So
Yeah, exactly. So, and with that, just I do the 3 by 3 rule, which isn't even really a rule. Um, if I make a city, I want three interesting locations around that city to
mm-hmm.
start with, and even just a single sentence about each. There's a temple in the woods nearby. There's ruins here, or there's a famous statue 2 miles this way. Just to start the world building process there,
Yeah.
and then I just keep going by threes. So then once I get to that temple, maybe I will say, okay, what are three interesting things here? It's simple and it directs you because I have ADD with world building.
Yeah. No, that's a lazy dungeon master technique.
I'll
I
be
believe
working
that
on a city.
the 3 by 3 is the
Yeah.
lazy DM thing, and
Yep.
I think that's a really handy, and it sets up lots of different plot hooks for your players as well. So
It does. Yeah. Okay, we'll talk briefly about NPCs because I know there was a whole panel on that, and I caught part of that.
yeah, that was
Um,
a good panel. John Allen Larges, yeah.
yeah. So what are the basics when you start creating the actual people in your world that you're going to interact with, or the organizations? What do you start with? What type of people or what type of NPCs do you start with?
I'll start with the leaders, and I'll sort of work down from there. So I'll think about who's in charge of this city or who's in charge of this civilization or tribe, and then I'll start thinking about people that the players are going to interact with. Alex calls them party patrons. They're the people that are giving quests, that are giving, information to the party. So, maybe you're creating a wood elven civilization, and you want to create the leader of the wood elves, that person's lieutenant, and then a lower ranking ranger that the players can kind of connect with and make an ally of. You know, if you're creating a dwarven city, maybe you're creating the dwarven king, the general in charge of the armies, and a blacksmith that the party runs into who supplies them with weapons, stuff like that. You know, so thinking about who are the players going to interact with, and focusing on those main ones, and always giving each of those NPCs a motivation of some kind, so you can make sure that they are moving the plot forward.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I usually go off of inspiration from, again, popular movies or TV shows or whatever to fill out the rest of that for the bigger people anyways, because I did a series called the NPC All Stars. It was a short one, but those are some examples of people that I used from TV to flesh those out. But just like you, I'll start with the leaders and kind of go break down. I mean, there's no need to make the local baker unless they're going to interact. I mean, you can if you want, but unless they're really going to interact with them, you don't need that ahead of time. You know, you can kind of improv those type of people. But yeah, give them a motivation. Wizards adventure building panel, but they talked about making them proactive and reactive.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Make them do things in the world regardless of the player characters. I mean, these people are living out their lives. You know, they're off doing stuff, and then make them react when your players interact with them. That's
exactly
kind of the basis of what I use for NPCs anyways.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you should be less worried about a plot for your game and more worried about the motivations and the actions of the NPCs and the player characters, because that's what's going to create the plot and drive it forward.
Yeah.
And
very well said.
I think, you know, going on the improv comment, I think, you know, a lot of the NPCs that I've created on the fly have been some of my favorite, because I have to all of a sudden think on my feet. You know, a good example is I had players who had come across these elven artifacts and they wanted to sell them. So they went to the pawn shop, and the pawn shop offered them money, and they go, was there like a shop that like specializes in elven goods? I go, yeah, there is. And I take them to this shop, and all of a sudden I have this NPC who's a human who is super into elven culture and dresses like an elf and has long blonde hair and sort of tries to look like an... He sort of becomes this really quirky NPC that the players get to interact with, and I had no idea he was there, he existed, or anything like that. But you know, being open to improving those type of things will make your world richer, I think, in the long run.
It will, yeah. You don't want to have everything fleshed out. You want room to work with, and we're gonna talk here in a little bit about how to involve your players. But first, having like a guide to your world. It's great to talk about all these world building things. What do you actually physically make? I know you've used Google Docs before. What documents are you actually making that somebody could kind of follow in those steps and create the same things?
Well, I usually I'll have my my campaign Bible. And this is something that Chris Perkins does, and so I sort of stole the idea from him, where he has a document that he can refer to that has the major cities, the major non-player characters. You know, what are the kingdoms? What are the empires that are enrolled, and what's the basic sort of background of this world going into the campaign? I tend to not overload my players down with that kind of stuff. If anything, I'll give them a page or two of background information that they can use to be thinking about what kind of characters they want to play. But for the most part, I like to sort of start them in media res, you know, just kind of giving them exposition as we start. Because I find players, depending on your group, are not super willing to sit there and read 19 pages about your campaign setting. You know, they want to be able to go in and explore it and discover it themselves. So, you know, I know you're really excited about your world. I know you want to share it with them, but don't hand them a book that has all the stuff, you know, with it in there, because they're either going to skim over it or they're going to go, oh, yeah, that's really great. I'll definitely read this before first session, and it'll just collect dust somewhere. So if anything, I'll give them a page or two, but I like to present it in the game. I like them to see it instead of hearing about it.
Yeah. That's a good, I think about everyone stole that campaign Bible idea once that was put out, because that was awesome. I do the same thing. And I give them a couple pages that I want them to read, like 2 to 3 tops. Yeah. And it's not just blocks of text. I mean, it's like names of important people, who they are, stuff their characters should know. And then I won't hide the rest from them. Like, I have a lot of information in documents, like city information, all that. If they want to look at it, then they can. I'll use like wiki pages for that, but don't force them to, because they'll go
Right.
through, my players at least go through spurts where, I don't know, one of them randomly will be bored on a weekend and they'll start shooting me a ton of messages on questions about the world, and they'll be wanting to read through everything,
Yeah.
and then for the next 4 or 5 weeks they want nothing to do with it. So
Exactly.
I have it
Yeah.
available, but don't expect them to go read all that. So that's,
Well, and
yeah,
if
good advice.
and don't be afraid to supply the information to them as they go. Like if you know that they're going to a particular city in the next session, give them some information that their characters would know about the city, you know. Or if someone decides, oh hey, I'm from this place, you can tell them what they would know as someone being from that place, you know. And you don't
Yeah,
need to completely give them all the information from the get go.
yeah, exactly. Um, okay, so if we don't get to any questions at the end, I'm gonna try to answer them all through like comments or something, anyways. And but if we can, we'll get to them. But the last thing I want to talk about for a little bit, anyways, is involving your players
Yeah.
in the world building process. Too many DMs, I think, take it all on themselves, and then they don't let anyone change anything, and
Yeah.
that's not good for a gaming group. The players, they want to be a part of that, even in a small dose. So I'll let you start. What are some of the things you've done in the past to involve them?
Well, I'll usually, um, it could be as simple as asking your players what they would be interested in, what kind of places they would want to go and visit, what sort of campaign they'd be interested in, and that can inform your world building process. But from a more in depth standpoint, you can ask your players, where is your character from? What is that place like? You know, and the player can say, well, I think my character is from this farming village, and then you go, okay, well, what is that farming village like? What's it called? What kind of people live there? What races are living there? Maybe tell me a little bit about your character's parents or some friends that they had there, and then all of a sudden your players are doing some work for you, and they don't really realize it because they just think you're asking, I don't know, for
Yeah,
for shits and giggles or whatever. But all of a sudden you have another location for your world. Um,
yeah,
and a good example is in my current D&D campaign, uh, Tim from Tabletop Terrors is playing a dwarf, and him and I have been working together on creating the city of Stone Rift, which is where the dwarves live in this area that they're in. And we have had a really awesome back and forth deciding what these dwarves are about, how they do what they do, because they're thunder dwarves. They collect lightning and use the lightning in their weapons and stuff like
oh,
that. And
sweet.
and they have like rudimentary electricity and stuff. And so we've been coming up with like sports that they play and like how their government works and like some notable people that are there and how their sort of their honor system and their laws work and stuff. And that's been a really fun just back and forth between sessions leading up to them visiting this place. And I'm doing the same thing with the Wood Elven location that Nate WSD20 is from and stuff like that. So it's conversing with your players about that. And some players are going to be more into it than others. Don't be offended if players
Yeah,
just want to get in your world and play. But you might have, 2 or 3 players in your group that are wanting to be collaborative and give you ideas for the world.
yeah. And I've used probably two different techniques. When I first started, I would offer in-game rewards if they did world building, and this is when we had an Obsidian portal page with a bunch of sub pages, and if they got on and created anything, I'd give them. I think I gave them what's basically the equivalent of like inspiration now, something
Cool.
like that, and they like doing that. A lot of them I noticed they liked creating artifacts, magic weapons, basically with huge, actually pretty big backstory and all this. But their
Oh, cool.
expectation was that in 15 levels they wanted that to be theirs. Like they
Yeah.
wanted to come across that. So you got to keep that in mind. um, but they've done that, or in game I've done it where you can go, and this will really shock them. But if you walk into like a tavern or someplace and then make them describe it,
Oh, yeah.
say, okay, what's the layout? What does it look like? And what's so different about this tavern from all the others?
Yeah.
And again, some will grab onto that and some will not want to be a part of that. So you have to know your group, I think.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing is that I had to learn anyways is to let them affect it, or let them build on and help build with you. I think that's kind of key. And no matter
Yeah.
which way you do it, be willing to let them be a part of that process if they want to be.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is that's so wise. Just like so many DMs and GMs have such a hard time just, you know, letting the players help them with that kind of stuff, and being open to discovering new things about their world. You know, it has to be collaborative. Otherwise, you're just telling your players a story, you know. And
Yeah.
um a quick point too is you don't always have to ask the players to create for the world, but it could be something as simple as like, hey, you know, we're about 2 or 3 sessions in. I'm kind of trying to get a feel for what your character's all about. Can you give me like 2 or 3 goals that they have? And maybe they say, well, I'd like to get a magical sword. I'd like to get revenge on those trolls that killed my parents, and I'd like to, you know, get some gold or something. And all of a sudden, you've got 3 plot hooks, and you can use those to create locations. Now, all of a sudden, that magic sword they want is in a tomb somewhere, and the trolls are in this location. And that can help sort of the world building process as well, as just asking what the players want, and then putting some of those things that they can try to attain within the world.
Yeah. No, exactly. You want, yeah, get that feedback from them. Find out, why are they at the table as well, and throw that in to what you have, because as a DM, yeah, you've got plenty of ideas. You're not short on them.
Yeah.
But so do the players, so let them, they're the ones playing it, let them kind of influence that anyways. And
Exactly.
what I did that was kind of interesting was I gave them each a place. This is about the only time I asked them each to do a world building thing without any reward. Each of their like hometowns or whatever, I gave that town to a different player to flesh out. So the rogue, he's from this northern town where like a warlord took over, and so he left when he was really little. That's all he gave me. So I gave it to like the cleric's player and had him actually create the backstory based on that. And that was kind of neat to see how they came up with stuff, because then they didn't create their own backstory and village. It was kind of influenced by what some other player did, which was kind of cool. But again,
That's awesome. I love that idea.
yeah, that took a while. After asking them to do that, it was probably 3 months before we had anything.
I believe that.
Yeah, so they were pretty good about it, but those are just some ways to involve your players anyways.
Right on. I love that idea.
So,
that's really cool.
Before we kind of close out and everything, do you have anything else to throw in? Any big tips that we haven't mentioned?
I suppose I would just say, like, world building is only as hard as you make it. So, like we were saying earlier in the panel, if you are limited on time, if you don't have the energy, do shortcuts, steal ideas, take a pre-established setting and use that as a base work, and look for inspiration in movies and books and video games and all of that stuff. It doesn't have to be this big scary thing. You're not doing any of this alone, and you're not doing any of it without resources. There are tons of resources online and all over the place, including your players and other fellow game masters to help you out. So yeah, it's only as difficult as you make it out to be. It doesn't have to be hard or scary.
Very, very good advice. Yeah, you're in charge. It shouldn't stress you out. I mean, unless you have a deadline and you are being paid and it's your job, if you're being stressed out, just change your approach. It's in your hands here, the deadlines and everything. So, and the thing that I would give along with that is take all that inspiration and don't be afraid at any point to get rid of something.
Yeah.
Don't get rid of something that the players have kind of built, that changes everything in the middle of the campaign. But while you're world building, don't be afraid to get rid of something that you used to think was really cool, but you don't anymore. Don't try to hold on to it just because it was an idea a year ago. And the final steps that I take before a campaign is doing just that, going through everything I've made and getting rid of as much stuff as I possibly can. Just anything that I'm not really, really in love with, if it doesn't need to be there, I'm just cutting it. And because that can make it really interesting really interesting process of just getting rid of what doesn't need to be there in the
Yeah.
end. So, but okay, that's 1 hour's worth of world building. This could be this could be a PhD if you really wanted to make it into one. But
It could be.
we squeezed it into an hour for attending. Watch our channels in the future because we both do a lot of this. Matt's channel, A Fistful of Dice, PhDnD. I'll let him close out here in a second because I know you're running something else yet today for BrigadeCon.
Yes.
So be sure, if you have not already, to join the RPG Brigade. I think it's the YouTube RPG Brigade on Facebook. Join the group, get involved with all this. Continue to check out BrigadeCon throughout the rest of the day. There's a lot of events Matt will talk about here in a second. And be sure, whether it's $1 or $100, if you can give anything, head to the BrigadeCon website and donate to Child's Play. That's the big thing we're trying to push today. All the money goes straight to them for this. So I want to thank everyone for watching, and I will let Matt talk about what he's got coming up today.
Okay. Yeah, I'm running a 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons game in about, I guess, 4 hours here. It's called Taking Root at Bloodleaf Abbey, and I think it's going to be a fun little one-off adventure for these players. And it's going to sort of display the 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons system in a very real, very tangible way. So if you're interested in seeing some live play of that, definitely stop by. And there are amazing games and panels happening all day up to that point. I think there's like 4 or 5 games happening right now at this time. So
Yeah.
go to brigadecon.org, check out some of the games that are going on, check out some of the panels, and definitely donate to Child's Play, as Kirk said. So thanks, Kirk, for having me. This has been great, man.
Yes, thank you for being a part of this. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to try to answer the questions we didn't get to, but thank you for watching, and go ahead and head to your next event for BrigadeCon. It's awesome, and we will see you there. Thanks, everyone.
See ya.